Let's get going.
Listen, you were making a bad choice if you trust me already. We've never met, Nikin. I'm telling you, I'm warning you. You're making a deal with the devil as soon as you trust me. How are you doing?
The devil indeed.
I think it's my smile, Every time I try to wonder why people think of me so nicely.
You're like the Indian version of Lucifer
Dude,
of the podcasting industry.
Do you mean Lucifer that's on Netflix? Because that guy's sexy as fuck. Right?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of episodes. Oh my, yeah. I mean, I was a little shocked. I was like, compliment? Is time pe din mein? Thanks. I appreciate the compliment. How are you doing? How's your morning?
Oh man, this is too early. The reason I became an entrepreneur is to set my own schedule. And one of the first things I did is no morning meetings. My earliest meetings, if it's not an investor or I think is 11, right? 10 or 11. So I wake up in my own sweet time. Now it's 6:30 a.m. EST.
Right. And
you're more important to me than an investor.
Of course. Who are we kidding here? Huh? But that's a very interesting thing you said. And I mean, I did not want to nosedive into a deep, point of conversation as early as this into the podcast, but it's a very interesting thing you said, because I wondered that about myself, right? Since we've been talking, we exchange notes as if we are standing on two sides of the same film. It's like, there is one mirror in the middle and we're standing on opposite side comparing notes as if, is it in any form or sense similar? If not in nature, if not in degree, if probably in quality, how your life as a founder is and how my life as a small little founder of this media enterprise is. And part of the reason why I ended up doing what I do is because it is so difficult for me to work on somebody else's schedule. I refuse. It's this inherent childlike rejection from the inside that I decided to, cultivate as a style. I was like, I'm not going to fight this. This is how I'm going to move along. Is that similarly for you when you say that, I became an entrepreneur, so I had to have no morning meetings? Is that one way of saying that? Are you like that?
Yeah, I would say, and this is, if someone asks me for advice really, right? And that's what I tell them is you want to do work that's aligned with your values, and that work might differ. So it could be, hosting podcasts, doing music production, being an entrepreneur, but they should be aligned with your values, right? And the values I'm talking about here is the desire for autonomy, right? Is the value of autonomy and control, right? And I would say that goes hand in hand with being an entrepreneur or a small business owner or any business owner.
Right.
That everyone I've met have this intrinsic desire to just take ownership of their life, take charge, take control. And that's a deep-seated value, right?
It's a deep-seated value. That's very interesting, because this value comes at a cost as well. And I wonder, every time I talk to an entrepreneur, every time, no matter who it is, no matter what entrepreneur I'm talking to, I always end up around the subject, because this is the most fascinating of all of things, right? Almost on an everyday level, I have to deal with what is called uncertainty. That could be in the form of hate, that could be in the form of new blockades, that could be in the form of not knowing what direction to take myself in, the fact that I don't know what amount of money I'll make in what amount of time, having to sustain a team behind me, etc., etc. I think it is rather underestimated from outside the fantastic doors of the startup universe as to how bloody, just uncertain and unanchored you are through the floating process. Do you feel similarly?
Absolutely. Yes, and I think Silicon Valley does a job of romanticizing it, right? So it's all, it's
I don't blame them. I don't blame Silicon Valley for that. Think about it. I, as a matter of fact, find it super cool that they were able to mythologize something so essential to the functioning of a political economic system. Right? Startups or starting businesses or self-ownership or creating jobs or throwing money into the market, bringing value into the market is a boring job if you put it like that, right? But to mythologize it such, and LA has been great help to Silicon Valley trying to do that. Let's be real, right? You movies and culture, they've made it super cool, and so now everybody wants to try. And even if the creme de la creme, the 1% survive, that changes the economy by a massive margin.
Yep. Right? And absolutely agree and one of my mentors says this, right, is as an entrepreneur, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? So that's embracing uncertainty, that's embracing risk. And there's a difference between the two, right? So you can have a large amount of uncertainty, but you can still reduce the risk. And that you can do it by in our industry, which is medical devices, you do it by running experiments, right? And the uncertainty, like you said, is not knowing who your investor is going to be, not knowing how much or when they're going to invest, and not knowing even your own personal financial situation, right, at any point of time in the future. So that's uncertainty, but you can de-risk an invention and innovation, right, and industry even, right? If you look at the podcasting industry, and again, I know very little about it, but in your case, you have successful podcast hosts, right? That you, in Joe Rogan, for example, and so many different podcast shows that I listen to, such as Business Wars, just to name one,
that tells me a lot
by
about
Wandery, and Deal Makers by Alejandro Cremanes, and then Y Combinator has its own set of podcast shows. So that's something you can draw inspiration from, and you could also create, or in the Indian market, or the bridge between the Indian American market, so to speak. Right. And similarly, I draw inspiration from other medical device and diagnostics entrepreneurs who have paved the path before me. Right. So that reduces the risk, but there is still a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah. I, quite unknowingly, with this one answer, you solved such an important linguistic obstacle for me, right? I had conceptualized in my YouTube, face cam videos that I do on Prakhar Ke Pravachan, the fact that there is a risk that people are afraid of before they start acting on stuff, no matter what that execution might be. And then I would keep telling people, listen, to understand how you need to do it and so on and so forth, run experiments. So it's almost as if I was approaching the same thing that you were saying from all these from two different sides, but I hadn't yet come across the word de-risk. And if I had the word de-risk in my vocabulary, I could complete the circle so it would make sense. And so thank you so much for giving me that word. That's going to be very helpful.
And
but go on. Yes.
Also, the difference between risk and uncertainty is, I think, to a certain extent, or to a large extent, that risk is quantifiable, right? So you can put a time around it, or it's going to take 3 months and cost $50,000, or it's going to take 1 year and cost $1 million. So risk is quantifiable, right? Whereas uncertainty is not. Yeah.
I want to press you on that a little bit so that I understand it better. But before that, I think it's important we lay down context for anybody who's trying to listen to this conversation. Your name is Nikin Tharan. Have I got that right?
Bingo. Yes.
You are all of 24 years old?
23. Turned 23 in November.
That's worse.
Yes.
You're 23 years old and you are a co-founder of a very prominent medtech startup, if I get that right.
Yes.
Tell us about that startup a little bit so we have a general idea. What does the medtech, angle to startups even mean? And don't give me the details just yet. I want to come to the details of what you do and how you came up with that idea. But just so we have an idea what you are invested in.
Yep. So I'm currently the co-founder and the CEO of a medical device startup. It's known as
CEO. Like the main CEO.
Chief Executive Officer.
Okay, main CEO. Okay, Right.
And Medsix. And right now we are about a team of 15. Right? So if I include our employees, fellow co-founders, employees, consultants, and advisors, we are a team of 15. We are based in Boston, Massachusetts, in the US. And the medical device or the diagnostics market in general, it's pretty big, right? It's a few $100 billion globally. And what we are trying to do specifically with our startup is we are focused on post-operative recovery management. So essentially the phase after surgery where the patient is recovering in the hospital and many cases even in the home health environment. And what we are trying to do with our device is detect early onset of post-operative complications. So when a patient is recovering after surgery, they are vulnerable, right? And there's so many things that could go wrong. So if there's a stitch after a surgery, the stitch might come apart, they might have internal bleeding, a leak. And we're trying to detect those as soon as they occur with the device because in the current standard of care, which is manual monitoring, there's a delay of anywhere from a few hours to a few days in detecting these complications. And that has a
Could be fatal.
huge burden on hospitals.
That could be
Yep.
fatal, right?
So you have mortality, morbidity, and also the costs, right, to hospitals.
Dude, I feel like you've given this elevator pitch so many times to your relatives and like friends that I could sense the fatigue when you were trying to go through your like post-operative care, almost like tired of having repeated the same sentence so many times. Am I correct in understanding that, or am I reading too much?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's tiredness, but it's I would say
It's
that's
jadedness?
I would say that's the door, right?
Uh-huh.
To so many more interesting things that we are doing.
Right.
So that's just opening the door, so to speak. So
Right.
that might come across as rehearsed or
Right, that's what I mean. It's
said enough
probably-
number of times.
Yeah, right. That's exactly what I meant. So, you're particularly young, even by my standards, because people tell me I am particularly young to be doing what I'm doing. You were even younger than I am, probably by a year and a half, if not a year. Right? It's pretty fantastic what you've made for yourself. I think you should. I hope you're proud of yourself. Like the fact that you are pursuing something that you feel about so passionately and then doing it by yourself, being the spearhead of something that is uncertain to land. It's quite a lot. So from one person who faces uncertainty every day to another, congratulations.
Thank you. And I would say I'm more grateful than proud. I leave that to my parents, right? And all of the people, parents, mentors, teachers, everyone who's backed me so far, right? Yeah.
So tell me about, because I know you through Suhas, who I don't think a lot of my regular listeners know about. Suhas was episode 1 on PG Radio, way before PG Radio was called PG Radio. Suhas was my classmate at Columbia. And you grew up with Suhas, right? You grew up in Bangalore.
Correct. Yep.
And your childhood is not regular. Like you had a distinct flavor to your childhood that I understand, that I want to really tease at.
I think Suhas and I were both the odd kids in maybe not entirety of Bangalore, but certainly North Bangalore. And the neighborhood we grew up in is this place called Yelahanka. It was this small village almost, right, in the 20 kilometers north of Bangalore city. And it was part of the Green Belt in the early 2000s. And then fast forward to 2007 or 8, the airport came 10 kilometers north of Yelahanka to another village called Devanahalli. And that pretty much transformed that entire area overnight, right? Or in the next few years. So both of us grew up in a time where the city around us, the town, the village around us was rapidly changing, right? So you had new companies being set up, urban sprawl occurring, colleges being opened. So it was just this dynamic, bustling place. And interestingly, if you look at the Bangalore census in 2001, 2011, they're probably going to do one now in 2021. So the population of Bangalore went from 4 million in 2001 to 8 million in 2011. So I think it's the highest growth of any large metro area. And we grew up in that period, right? So you could say that taught us, or that made us used to this rapid pace of change, right? Yeah.
There's something very interesting I was reading that's written by Paul Graham, very much a known entity in the circles that you were in. He wrote about how cities whisper to you. And I felt that living in New York, because it's so distinct from a place like New Delhi, or for that matter Faridabad, which is like an outskirt city to New Delhi. And it was that, like, I would tell people, like, you wake up at 2 a.m. in New York. If your eye opens and you stare outside the window, there is no way in hell one of the thoughts that runs in your head is not about work. That city is always moving. It's whispering to you. Quite something, right? And it depends on probably the area you live in. But Paul Graham said, for instance, New York whispers to you to get richer. Boston whispers for you to get smarter. LA whispers for you to get more famous, so on and so forth. And I think it might be very similar for Bangalore, because like there is it's so many people that I meet from Bangalore speak in a language that is very common to the
I think Bangalore whispers IT, but I didn't take that path, and neither did Suhas. So we're a little different. Or we probably heard a different whisper. Yeah.
But it's also enterprise, right? Like Bangalore stands for a kind of enterprise in the Indian context like no other city does. Quite frankly, like nobody's enterprising here in New Delhi. They're all busy showing off. I'll be very honest, right? So it's probably that. Like I wonder if, because here's what I'll tell you about Faridabad though. Because this city is so weirdly placed an hour away from New Delhi, where you see what is happening in Delhi, but you never get to experience it. It's far enough for you to travel, but not far enough for you to not be exposed. A lot of people took to alternate means of reaching out. So there's a lot of content creators in this city for a very weird reasons that do very, very well across the number one YouTuber in the country is from Faridabad. It's a strange city to be from. It's an industrial town. What the hell are you doing here? Or what the hell am I doing here? Right? So I wonder if that has got something to do with it. But it probably was the fact that Bangalore was evolving at such a pace, because you have to admit that growing up in a place that does not have that kind of enterprise does not really lay the architecture for you to think about having your own enterprise. Don't you think? Is it a possible explanation for the anomaly that is you, or would you like to investigate alternate hypotheses?
I would say it's yes.
It could be a contributing factor.
It is a contributing factor, and it's nurture along with nature, right? So it's the environment. Some of it is genetics, no doubt, and other is the way you're raised, right? So the values your parents hold and the way they raise you, and also the opportunities they expose you to,
right.
Or even if you are taking initiative of your own, right, which is unconventional, off the well-worn path, is the extent to which they support you, right? And for those opportunities to exist, you're right. So you do need to be in a certain kind of location, right? So it helps to be in an enterprising city.
Sure. But your childhood was also very weird, because I don't think you did regular schooling, right? Like Suhas wasn't doing regular schooling either, and I don't think you were either, right?
A few years in regular school.
A few years I
yes.
tried out school. It was just too dumb for me. I was like, I'm just gonna. So you dropped out of school because it was too easy?
I wouldn't say it was too easy. I would say I wasn't challenged enough.
Right. I mean, that's a good way of putting it. You did not feel challenged enough.
Yes, and the structure wasn't. I wasn't like we were talking about how entrepreneurs favor, or one of the values that entrepreneurs look for is control and autonomy. I think I had that, or I expressed that when I was younger as well. So 7, 8, 9 started being very independent, right? So started taking ownership, control, autonomy. And part of that was also with my education. So I used to finish the entire year's syllabus. I went to a lot of tuitions. So I had tuition teachers for every subject, right? Because only they could keep me challenged. And used to finish the entire year's syllabus over the summer. And during the school year was pretty much very, very bored, right? And did a lot of Olympiads, a lot of extracurricular. Every Olympiad, the National Cyber Olympiad, Science Olympiad, Math Olympiad, Physics, Chemistry, any and all Olympiads.
Right.
Yeah. And the Bonvita, the quiz competitions, like chess competitions.
Oh, you play
anything
chess?
And everything else.
You play chess?
Used to, a few years in school, yes.
Why have you never spoken about that? Sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
Yes, and so kept challenged with kept myself challenged with extracurricular activities outside of school, but academics, not so much. And finally, I think, so 1st grade to 7th grade, I was in the school called Delhi Public School. I mean, it's known throughout India, and this was this was in Bangalore North. And finally, in 7th grade, I remember it was the first month of 7th grade, right? And I went up to my parents. I was like, "Mom, Dad, I just can't take it anymore. This is like driving me crazy. I just cannot go another day to school." And again, they were very supportive and they've seen me from 1st grade, right? And so they were very supportive, and that's when we decided to essentially drop out, right, and get homeschooled. And I went to tuitions, so I kept up a heavy coursework, and in parallel to that, and I was doing a lot of work in electronics as well, which we could talk about more. And they had seen.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No. I was like, I definitely want to talk about it, but just so that I have a picture, just so I have a handle on this, right? It's that what at least a succinct way, if not the most precise way, to put the situation in context, is to say that school was too slow for you, so you decided to take control of your own jet plane, fly as fast as you can while maintaining whatever you had to do on the school level. You started exploring on
Yes.
your own.
Yes,
And you do admit
exactly.
it's an anomaly.
Yes, I've realized that over time. Yes.
Right. Because I'm not like, let me take the pressure off of you, and I don't know if it's a pressure, but let me take the pressure off of you of considering if there is a natural talent that you were born with. Let me, because the investigation I wanted to make on the nature nurture dichotomy was on the end of nurture. This electronic stuff that you were doing very early on. I think what you invest yourself with as a child, especially in the fashion where you were just so lost in an alternate reality, has a very massive residue on what you end up doing. Right?
Absolutely. Yep.
I relate to you when you say that you started taking your education by the horns, because I was one of the kids where I was like, listen, if I'm not interested in this, it does not matter if it's going to be on the test. If I am interested in understanding this, this matters to me, right? I can still not rote learn stuff because I refused very early on, and then I never practiced that muscle. I was just like, this is not going to serve me in the long run. So I understand that to some extent, but you took it one degree further, and I want to understand primarily, what does that kind of conviction look like? Because this is not for seventh graders to decide, in general day-to-day life, to be like, hey, listen, I'm going to jump off school. What had the conviction be so heavy that you were like, this is the right thing to do?
Yep. That started in second grade, right? Is the summer of second grade. Is at that time, again, an anomaly is I barely watched any cartoons, right? So if anyone asks me about cartoons now, I have literally no memory, because, or maybe naturally, maybe not, but I always favored science-based documentaries. So
In
National
second
Geographic,
grade?
Discovery Channel, even before that. So anytime I put
Okay.
on TV, it was Discovery Channel, National Geographic, the History Channel,
Right.
right? And that being said, there was this show on National Geographic, uh, if I remember correctly, known as I Didn't Know That. So it was this two British dudes trying to deconstruct, scientific experiments and whatnot. And that got me inspired, right? And I started doing or making a mess of things around the home. And what I mean by that is deconstructing electrical appliances, right? So trying to find out what's inside the refrigerator, because they're doing that in the show. What's inside an electric trimmer, what's inside a gas stove. And very quickly, my mom grew concerned that, Nikin, this is not, the home
Regular
is not the
child
best
behavior.
place
Yes, you are not doing this right,
for
huh?
you, for you to conduct experiments. So let's find an outlet, right? Or
Right.
let's find a class or a course, a tuition almost, where you could explore this further. So we set about actually going around to a few institutes around Bangalore. We went to, if I remember correctly, C.V. Raman Institute, that's in North Bangalore, a few other institutes, and all of them said the same thing. You're too young, put a few years and come back to us in high school, and we'll take you as an intern. But interestingly enough, the community we lived in, so this is North Bangalore, and it has a high concentration of defense institutions. So the Indian Air Force, the Border Security Force, ISRO, DRDO, all of them have campuses in North Bangalore. And specifically the community we stayed in, lots of researchers, professors, um, service personnel from all of these different branches were our neighbors. And one of our neighbors ran an electronics lab for the Border Security Force. So he's a professor at the Border Security Force Institute of Technology, and he ran a lab there as well. And it was pretty much a coincidence meeting him. So we just saw the board of his lab as we were driving, and this is in Yelahanka, right? And the lab was a few kilometers away from the main campus, and we essentially, I was 7, 8, walked up to the lab and asked the professor, and my mom did the talking then. I was just like eagerly, as any kid, just like looking around the lab. Mom asked his permission whether, Nikin could hang around and learn, right? And the professor basically gave me free access to that lab and then started spending almost all of my free time there. Whereas most of my peers would, be playing in the apartment uh, parking lot, right? And breaking window panes with the cricket balls and whatnot. I was at the electronics lab. So weekday evenings, weekends, any and all free time I could get. And this is where that nurture is important, because for all of this to happen, my parents, they pick me off, they drop me off, they pick me up, right? So we were well, we were well to do. So we had a car, and each of them had cars, so they could take turns dropping me off, picking me up. So again, without that, this wouldn't have been possible.
I mean, forget the
And
car, forget like it's more about the exposure in the lab, because I begin to wonder from purely like a psychological standpoint how it begin. Like I wonder how your reality looks like inside your head, because if you grow up with tools, stuff that I have no concept of, if you ask me to move, if you asked me, I don't know, to connect wires, I would be as dumb as, I don't know, a calculator. Like I don't know how to do that, right? So that circuitry, that concept is not existent in my head, and I wonder if you start developing on these skills when you're as early as 7, for whatever want or reason, not an encouragement to people, but for whatever good reason, what that does to the way you look at the world and how that helps you. I played chess. That's why I got so excited when I was 3. My anomaly was that I was a rather good chess player. I wasn't exceptional on the national level, but I was pretty much remarkable on the state level. So I was playing a lot of chess very early on, right? I was beating my family and my peers very early on. And what that does to me even today is that when I think, it's almost like a chess puzzle, no matter what I'm thinking about. It's like a chess puzzle. And most of my analogies end up being so much about chess, and most of my thinking about complexity stems from scaling the complexity of a chessboard. So much of that comes from that one. Even so much of the attitude that I have towards life, whether I want to persist or do I want to adapt and variate and find another, all of those thoughts in one form or the other, the passion for solving problems, all of that comes from my training with chess.
that's interesting that you pointed it out. So yes, similarly for me, I tend to. So the lab itself did work in electronics and embedded systems, and what that basically means is an embedded system is, for example, if you take smart home, right? So you press a button and a light turns on in your home. So you have the GSM transmitter, which is your phone. Then you have a GSM receiver, which would be in your home. And then you'd have different components and modules. So you'd have an integrated circuit with a microcontroller. Then you'd have a relay and processor. Then you'd have a power circuit and a rectifier. So that, in a nutshell, is embedded systems. And today, that's known as Internet of Things, right? So Arduino has popularized it, and there's a lot of do-it-yourself at home stuff right now in the marketplace. But like you said, is you've started to view the world essentially through the lens of a chess player, and like a chess game. I would say I view the world through the lens of embedded systems, right? So this system or this person can do XYZ, and that person can do XYZ. And if you put all of these people together in, let's say, an organization, then it becomes a startup, a medical device startup. So you need consultants, advisors, and what kind of consultants, advisors do you need? What should their skill sets be? So
That's so
looking at things from a system level and breaking it down by components. Yeah.
right. The way I see it is pieces on the board. That's how I see it. Your bishops can only move diagonally, your knights can jump over whatever they want to jump over. That's how I see it. And I often use this, like I'll use an analogy like, do you prefer to play with your bishops? And the answer is never yes or a no. Right? It's like it depends on the position. So it sort of allows me to really put in examples about how you deal with situations in your life using that. And I see that there is a similar, like this metaphorical thinking that we're capable of, right? The fact that we can switch between domains, right?
And I think what might be missing from chess, which is very true and present in coding and especially electronics is errors, right? So you need to develop incredible, probably in chess too, but incredible patience. And also, so you try one thing, it doesn't work, try another thing, doesn't work, try a third thing, and you just keep at it. And then maybe you take a break, you get an insight, you try again, and you achieve a breakthrough, right? And this could be anywhere from a day, 2 days, like a weekend, or sometimes even weeks, right? So having that level of perseverance towards just attacking a problem over and over and over again and not giving up is another part of it, right? So you could say it's called debugging, right?
Right.
Or just resolving errors.
Right.
But that's another skill you learn through that process of doing it for a few years.
For sure, you know how we do debugging with chess is because you know you have to play the game and then there's a time constraint. And so when we were young and we'd play games and tournaments and when we'd finish, we'd come back home and then we'd sit for the next 3 hours playing each move over and over, working each variation over and over. So you knew where you bugged up in the game. So you knew where you could have done something differently, what were you thinking and what you could have been thinking. And it's not just what move you could have been thinking. It is that what attitude you were at when you were playing that game. Were you scared? Did you not go aggressive because you were scared? And so you like it's pretty much the same in the sense that you can probably borrow a metaphor out of anything. That's probably the only downside with metaphors and idioms.
I watched the Queen's Gambit, so I think I can try to understand what goes on in your mind. Yes.
For sure. Oh, I mean, nowhere close. I think the Queen's Gambit was trying to go for like an Alekhine Murphy kind of madness when it comes to chess, where it only makes sense when you're deep in insanity. Like Paul Murphy, legendary American player, drove himself to craziness playing chess. He was so good, he was crazy. And that's this recurring theme with chess players throughout history that they were trying to portray. I had my problems with Queen's Gambit. I'm a chess purist, so, you know. But tell me about this electronics lab, because this sounds very interesting to me. The chessboard is obvious. It's just 8 by 8, right? This electronics lab, your incubation, home ground. What is that? What did that look like?
Yeah, started that at 7 or 8. And second, third grade. Started spending almost all of my free time, the weekday evenings, weekends there. And again, I was very, I mean, as most 7 and 8-year-olds are, short, right? And everyone around me was a multiple of my age, right? So it's men with mustaches and didis, right? So lots of buyers and didis. And they were a mixture of people in that lab. So they were professors, and then they were graduate students, they were undergraduate students, and a wide variety of things happen in that lab. So every semester when you had theory being taught in the college, so the BSF, the Border Executive Force Institute of Technology at BSF IT, so the students came to the lab to conduct the semester experiments, right? So every semester you have experiments, then you have exams, you have Viva and whatnot. Then at the end, when they were graduating, you had what's known as a capstone project, a senior project. So they came to that lab to do the senior project as well. And then the lab also did collaborations with other institutions across India and helped independent researchers do their own research, right? And all of this within electronics, within the domain of embedded systems. And initially there, I just sat on a bench and I observed. And for the first few months, you could say, I was just observing all the didis and buyers, looking through their notes, looking through college textbooks, right? So college manuals, college textbooks, and then coming home and going on Wikipedia on the internet and trying to understand the different terminologies. What was a circuit? What was an R2R ladder network? What was a Darlington emitter follower? What was an amplifier, right? So trying to understand everything. And if I had any questions, I used to ask a Didi or buyer that, and they used to help answer it. And what ended up happening is, again, this didn't happen immediately, maybe a year or two after just being in that environment, just assimilating, is sometimes the professor one or two of the professors used to leave for lunch, right? And the class used to be empty, and all the students, right, they were just there to do their experiments. They used to just quizzically look at each other, right? And be on their phones to pass time, or they didn't know how to do the experiment. So then I used to step in and help them do the experiment, or let's say, conduct mock Viva, question and answers. And if they had
as
a doubt,
10-year-old?
Yeah, wow. As a 10-year-old.
This story's taking
And
me
then
somewhere. Huh?
and then also over the course of a few years started putting together projects too. So we there were wide variety of projects that, I mean, some of them were very fascinating. Like we once did a tabla playing robot with pistons. Like that was very pretty fast. One was actually a anti-train collision device using track vibrations, right, not GPS. That was interesting. Another one which I worked on very closely was a smart home. So we have gas cylinders in India, right? So it's having a gas sensor that sounds the alarm that would automatically send a notification to the police. And again, we're talking about 2010, 2011, when you didn't have smartphones, right? BlackBerry was probably there, but the phone of choice was Nokia, right? Those
Right.
brick phones. And also, we didn't have so much internet penetration or Wi-Fi everywhere, right? And so you could say IoT, which is the term used to describe all of these projects today, Internet of Things. That's the name, as a term used to describe the industry and all of the projects that I worked on. It was in its nascency.
Why is it
Right?
called the
So
Internet of Things? That's such an interesting name.
because you could, with IoT, or you could make anything smart. So if you put a few sensors in a washing machine, it becomes smart. If you put a few sensors in a fridge, it becomes smart.
Right.
And now with Alexa, you can talk to basically anything. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. And voice enabled. And so all of this didn't exist back then. So each of these different components we had to assemble and create by ourselves. So one example of this is just in terms of ICs, right? So today you get an inbuilt, if you order through Arduino for $20, you get fully functional.
If I get a what for $20? What did you say? What was the word?
Arduino, it's a do-it-yourself at home. It's like a hobbyist electronics kit, right?
Right.
And with $20, you get a very, very powerful microcontroller through which you can do a whole bunch of stuff. But in 2010, 2011, we had to create a circuit on a software. Then we had to work with a manufacturer to print out that circuit board and then put all the different components, solder it in the circuit board. And then for the IC itself, the chip itself, we had to essentially burn a program using assembly language onto the chip. So what today you could order online and do in a day or less than that, it took us a few weeks to do, right? So just the amount of time it took to put together a prototype or a project was so much longer, right? Yeah. So the entire industry is, it's gone through an exponential growth phase,
For
right?
sure.
But that was you could say my learning the ropes, the training wheels, is working on those projects. And I vividly remember is in 4th, 5th grade, right? We had school science projects. So this was in DPS North, Bangalore North, and we had the school science projects. Many of my classmates had the volcano with the baking powder, right? And I had
You were like Rick from
fully
Rick and
assembled.
Morty, huh?
Yes. And I had the fully assembled prototype, like a benchtop prototype of the smart home. So you could send an SMS from the phone, it would turn a light on, right? You could send another SMS, it would turn a fan on, or if there were any things going on in this mock home, it would ping your phone back, right? For example, if someone rang the doorbell. And again, this took 2 months to put together. We had a whole report in it. Many students in that lab actually used that as an end of semester project, right? And they got very good grades. And one even went, I think, to a national science fair with that same project, right? So the BSF nominated him to go there. So, again, this was just one of the projects. I ended up working on many, many projects, over 12 projects. So like I said, tabla playing robots, smart traffic signal, anti-theft systems, the smart home. And I think there were even a few military oriented projects. So because this was the border security force, so you had intruder detection, you had missile detection, like using lasers, infrared and lasers.
Dude, you were all of 11?
And this was through starting when I was 7, 8 till when I was 16. So it was
Between
over
all
the
of that,
span
okay.
of 8 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So throughout that time, again, the youngest one by a huge margin in
Oh
that
yeah.
environment, right? Yeah.
Right. Remind me first of all, before I forget, that when we meet, I want to understand the analog basics of this entire process. Like when you were talking about how you had to burn the instruction in assembly language onto the chip, that's so interesting to me. I don't even know how to visualize that. So whenever we meet, and we will, I'm gonna have you sit down, walk me through like a 6 hour lecture on all the basics of understanding electronic engineering, because I get none of that.
And then we play a game of chess.
While we play a game of chess, we play multiple games of chess as we go about doing that. But here is something I want to ask you. Were you thrown around in like events as like, were you recognized for being an anomaly, or was this like, acha theek hai, is this like this 8-year-old that comes to the lab? Because I'm pretty sure if you were doing what you're telling me you were doing, heads were turning, right? People were noticing that there's a boy wonder thing happening here.
Yes. So parents definitely, neighbors definitely, right? And school and within the border security force too, right? Directors and, the higher levels, right? More than professors used to come in and just
Inspect you.
the professor. Yes,
Put a
exactly.
light through your ear, see if this is normal, huh?
Yes. And used to essentially, it was like I said, pride is for your mentors, your teachers, for those around you, right? And my main feeling I always have is gratitude. And so they were very proud of this happening, right? So a kid taking an interest in electronics and contributing to
More than an
projects
interest.
and doing projects by himself too. Yeah.
I think I
And
don't know if you relate to a normal childhood. I don't know if you were like around normal childhoods to understand what normal child. I'm sure you were, but just so that it's clear, you were not just taking an interest. You were kicking butt. At 7, 8, 9, 10, most people are watching, like at least my age, were watching SWAT Cats or Flintstones or Scooby Doo on repeat. And it's not to deride that. In fact, I loved it. I'd still pick this. But what you were doing was pretty badass, and I hope you I'm glad people around you were recognizing it. I'm sure when you'll have your kids and they'll turn out to be 1 degree more normal than you are, you'll be like, oh, acha, that. Okay, now I get it. But good job, man. Tell me about...
and
Right, please.
oh no, just to wrap up an earlier, or to quickly summarize an earlier question you had asked. So since I was doing this in parallel to whatever I was doing at school, right, which is I was in Challenger at school and was just keeping myself engaged to all of the different Olympiads and other extracurricular activities. So when I went up to my parents in 7th grade and I told them that school doesn't interest me anymore, they had 6 years of data to
Right.
to support my decision on, right? And again, not that they didn't get flack. So all of our neighbors, family,
Of course.
it's like, what are you doing with your kid's life, right? This is not what kids do. They have to go stage by stage through school. So lots of flack.
And then
but
landed
they were
in-
supportive. Yeah.
Right, go on.
They were super supportive, right?
Right.
And all they wanted me to do is they wanted me to make sure that I finished all of the syllabus, right? And that I got the grades I got.
Like a threshold
And-
requirement.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And-
I know what you mean.
And again, this was only for a few years, right? Because so conventionally, what is 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade for most people? So 4 years of schooling. In my case, I was able to do it in 2 years because I did my 10th grade exams as a private candidate. So there's this other school known as Malya Aditi and IGCSE, which is a different syllabus from CBSE at DPS Bangalore North. IGCSE allows you to take your 10th grade, or known as O levels, as a private candidate. So you need no school affiliation. And I sat for that IGCSE exam when I was 14, right? So essentially, those 4 years of schooling, I ended up skipping effectively 2 grades. And 11th and 12th grade, I went to, here in the US, they call it magnet schools, right? But in India, we call them IIT prep schools, right? So I went to Fiji because in those 2 years, I had driven my parents
Please
crazy,
tell me
right?
you were
So
challenged at FitG. Please. I've seen so many people lose all, like the life in their eyes disappear in FitG. Please tell me you were challenged at least there.
yeah, after skipping 2 years and actually being with some of the smartest people in the country, because they had an entrance exam to get into that school,
Right.
and they took the top 100 or so people nationally and they put them in that school, right? Yes, I was not only challenged, I was intimidated, right, by all of my peers. And then I realized that, oh, have I actually bitten off more than I could chew, right?
Right.
Because everyone just incredible caliber. And yeah,
That's insane, man.
finally, yes, found that challenge I was looking for.
No, we've exchanged notes on the subject of how this happens, and I mean, because I know a lot of young people also listen to me, and a lot of older people also listen to me, my podcast. It's rather important that I state that, because I found this resistance. This might be a passive resistance. I don't mean to say the society conspires to push you to not take risks. It's probably passive, but individual actors don't realize how small contributions, how small whispers that they make to, for instance, my family about my future, create an environment where it becomes difficult for other people, not me. I'm very stubborn. I'll do my thing anyway. For other people to take that leap of faith. It's very common where they'll be like, listen, there are stages to life, child. You need to go to school, you need to go to college. And you keep wondering where these invisible masses are that create these whispers. But they're right around you all the time. We are so programmed, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as an observation. We are so programmed for security because we've lived through so much economic trauma as a country, as a culture, as a society, that we forget that the only way to escape it is to leave it behind. And the way you leave it behind is by encouraging people like you. And I'm glad I can become an amplifier because you said amplifier to your voice. It's rather encouraging for other people to take that leap of faith and, hopefully have their kids or themselves go through this process of self-ownership and, creating.
And that's my goal too, right? Because in my, you could say, my heart of hearts, I truly believe that I'm just a regular kid from Yelahanka, right? Who's had many doors open, who's taken certain choices with his life. But I also truly believe that if I can do it, anyone else can do it.
Or at least give it a shot. Forget about completing it. Give it a shot, right?
And that's my message of inspiration. And I similarly derive this from other entrepreneurs, right? Obviously, you have the greats, Bezos, Gates, Musk, and whatnot. But the way I think about them is, they are human beings too. And if they can do it, I can do it too. Because all of us were created with, all of us were born the same, right? Babies, and everything else is a result of programming, nurture, nature, choices.
For sure. Tell me about... So you effectively spent 8 or 9 years in an electronics lab. Probably the most fundamental years of your cognitive development were spent doing stuff that I still have no concept about. That probably shaped how you were looking at the world. That also shaped how the world was looking at you. It acknowledged you as separate, as unique, as boy wonder maybe in so many cases. And then you went on to skip 2 grades. So you were pretty much ahead of the curve the whole time. Then you ended up in the States. You ended up in the States because a university called you up and they were like, we want you. Did they recruit you or did you apply?
I had to apply actually. And that happened because, again, even though I was preparing for IIT, right, in 11th and 12th grade, I had just finished so much of the electronics syllabus, right? And by that time, I had finished even the master's level syllabus in India. And what I already knew by then is the syllabus just wasn't updated often enough. So in those 8-9 years, and I was around the textbooks all the time. So there was maybe one update right, in 8 years. And here in the US, you have committees of professors who sit almost every semester to upgrade and revise the syllabus to make it very relevant to industry.
I mean, it's technology. How can you stay behind on updating syllabus about technology? That's the whole curve. This is the, it's like not updating communism in the 20th century. That's all the talk everywhere. You've got, and there were updates, right? I wonder how you can not update something like information on technology at schools. That sounds kind of odd to me.
Yes, the argument there is I discussed this extensively with the professors at that electronics lab, and the argument there was, oh, Nikin, you need an undergrad or a bachelor's is a fundamental education, and fundamentals don't change, and you need a good fundamental education. However, you don't, I believe, you don't need 4 years of fundamentals, right? You need, absolutely, you need your fundamentals clear, but at the same time, you could add additional courses, components, which involve or which are better reflective of the industry trends and technologies available. Yeah.
I think in any case, the status quo explanation is never satisfactory. Like particularly with education, I think the status quo, as soon as they start making a claim, listen, our system works, you need to look at what the system creates, not what the system looks like. In theory, it all sounds beautiful, but if it's creating no jobs and it's creating no employment and it's creating no entrepreneurs and no enterprise and no, if it's not creating people like you and me actively, right? If it's creating people that are unhappy with
reform.
their life, a system is to be judged by what it creates, what it produces, what the output is, not what the system is like on the inside. So you may talk about basics, but are the basics clear? I went through a whole horrid experience of studying through my chartered accountancy years, and people would tell me, listen, this is the most beautiful thing you can do to your life, right? And this clears your basics in fields across law and finance and accountancy, and I'm like, let's go talk to somebody who just finished a C and see how clear they are, because the system's not creating good people. If the system's not creating clarity, you can talk about whatever bullshit theory. So there's that. But you got invited to what university did you apply to? Where were you at in the United States?
Yep. So essentially that application process and coming to the US, 11th, 12th grade, started looking at international universities. And again, I went to this IIT prep school. So not great school counselors, or there was no school counselor. So I had to do all of the applications by myself. So they could have, in hindsight, right, they could have been much stronger, much more reflective of
it's a
all the
parasitic
work
industry. Counseling here for colleges is a very parasitic industry. I've sat through it myself.
Yeah. And so I ended up applying to quite a few universities, actually, 22 universities in the US. And I remember we got 17 straight rejections, all of the Ivy Leagues. And I couldn't pay much too, so I needed a scholarship, right? So
Sure.
that financial need combined with just, and at that point of time, what was an average application, right? And it led to those sets of rejections. However, the one university which opened the door, so that was Northeastern University in Boston, they offered a full scholarship and along with flight tickets too.
Oh my
Right?
God.
And-
Okay, nice. Huh.
And that came in Valentine's Day 2014. So
Looks like, right. Saint Valentine.
great
blessed you.
timing. And I remember for whatever reason that day, we didn't have internet in our home. So I had to go to an internet cafe.
Cyber cafes.
Right now. Cyber cafe. Are they still around?
I think they're extinct, man.
They're extinct, yes.
Yeah.
So I had to go to a cyber cafe to check. And then I didn't have a phone with me, right? So I had to run home to tell the news to my parents. So I have a very fond memory of that day. Yeah.
That's incredible. I relate to that. Like when I started, you applied earlier to university. I applied later. I was 20, 21 when I was applying. And so all counselors, when they'd look at me, they'd be like, you're going to get rejected. Somebody straight up had the balls, had the audacity to look me dead in the eye and be like, you are ruining your career. You're ruining your life. Don't make this move. Don't apply to these schools. And they offered me some bullshit second-rate solution instead. Right? I remember walking inside. I remember coming back home after meeting several of these people angry. Because I was like, who the hell do you think? You tell me what school to apply to. If you cannot tell me you can't, stop commenting on my life. Right? Stop selling me stuff I'm not here to buy. Stop doing that to me. And a lot of these people are very, very prominent figures in this industry. People you'd see at all these college fairs and whatnot, grandstanding the entire occasion, so on and so forth. And then I got into Columbia. Right? And I mean, they weren't entirely wrong to their credit. Universities had a hard time looking for me, but I got into 3 or 4 of the best universities in the world, in America and in the UK.
And
right?
prove them wrong. Yep.
And I mean, I wasn't actively trying to prove them wrong. It's just that it's just a parasitic industry. This whole thing is run on recommendations and the money that comes from it. I don't trust it. It's quite unfair that I could have been discouraged. I could have never made the move. My life could never have changed had I listened to them, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are not as stupidly courageous as I was trying to make that shift, or probably as blindly optimistic as you were after 17 rejections, right? Because it takes a certain toll on the way you think about the world. When you've had 17 rejections back to back, it's not easy to pick yourself up and be like, we'll try another time or something of that nature.
Yeah, you don't even want to open the email, right? You're like, oh, I know what it's going to say, right? Because you have to log into the portal to check the decision.
Right. And so you studied electrical engineering at Northeastern then?
Yep. So came in August 2014, so fall of 2014. And Northeastern's interesting because you can do a degree in 4 years, and you can also do a degree in 5 years by doing 3 6-month internships essentially, or you can do a degree in 4 years by doing 2 6-month internship. And again at Northeastern, as is probably very evident by now, a semester or two of coursework, and I was like, okay, time to press fast forward on this too, right? So
Oh, really?
ended up graduating in.
You were bored of Northeastern as well? You were like, this is not challenging me either?
Structure, coursework, academics, that. But outside of school, Entrepreneurs Club, any and all opportunities outside of school, right? Whether it's volunteering for nonprofits, going to weekend hackathons, being part of different student clubs on campus, being part of different associations outside of campus, right? Made networking quite extensively. So did what needed to be done at Northeastern to maintain my scholarship, get through one semester after another, maintain my visa. But outside of that, just hustling on the side, doing research and just learning as much as I could and getting out there, right? So that's what I spent a lot of my energy and focus on in those 3 years at Northeastern. So I came in August 2014 and I graduated in December 2017. Yeah.
Nice. How did you like Northeastern? I hear it's not that cool.
Like I said,
I'm just messing with you.
boundless gratitude, right?
Right.
So the mascot is a husky. So all of us are huskies. And yeah, once a husky, forever a husky.
Dude, I mean, you do have to admit though, as a matter of a very honest observation, the sheer quality of education between a place like India, a regular, probably even BSFIT, if for me that was Delhi Public School and Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, because I went to DBS too. The sheer change in the quality of education between that and Columbia, and I'm not even trying to equate those are not, but is a whole different standard deviation away than most people's farthest imaginations. Right? If I think of my alma mater, as much as I have respect for where I come from, it has to be the last 3 years at that bloody institution, because it changed the way I see the world forever. That was an environment like nothing else. I think it contributed so heavily to what I've become. It's inseparable.
And for me, what was a culture shock, right? Again, my family traveled very little when I was younger. Maybe my parents were originally from Tamil Nadu, so vacation to the village in Tamil Nadu, that was it, right? So never went north of Devanahalli, right? So never went north of
the airport.
Nandi Hills, right?
Right. Nandi Hills.
Nandi
Sure,
Hills,
right.
Nandi Hills. Never went north of Nandi Hills. Was Tirupati further north, but that's it, right? So coming here, what was my impression of America came from basically watching movies, right? It was Hollywood, word of mouth. And coming here, and again, there were certain stereotypes, but what truly amazed me, still amazes me, is diversity, right? So you have immigrants from everywhere, right, coming here in pursuit of the American dream. And I met people from countries that I had only read about in Wikipedia, right? And I probably never could have. And like you said, so whispers like you pointed out, so there are people who whisper into your family. There are also people who whisper to you, maybe someone you have met once in an elevator, right? Or once over lunch. And just that,
Chance
the amount of
encounter.
diversity,
For sure.
yep, chance encounter diversity, and the caliber of these people too, right? So most people who again, who go stage by stage, who have a very structured view towards life, they would be in their home countries, right? So there's safety there, there is security to a certain extent. You know what's going to happen next, and you have a support network, friends, family, whatnot. So it takes a certain enterprising individual to even make the leap to a foreign country, even if it's to study, right?
All
Even
right.
if it's not to found a startup, have a career, but even if it's to study. And when you put all of them in a place, in a location, and you encourage interaction and collaboration, right? And the results, like we are talking about, is company formation, scientific
Oh, you
breakthroughs,
were spot on with
and
that. You were so spot on with that. Like here is what I think the formula for that is, and I think this is a strong advantage that probably gets lost in the economic discussion of immigration when it comes to America. I think America fails to recognize what it does right. And maybe they do, but here is what it is. It's you put together a bunch of people with very diverse backgrounds that have very different conceptual models about the world, different cognitive assessments of the world, different ways of seeing at the world, to put it to a layman. And then you create a point of focus that is none of those things. It's outside, like starting a med tech company, right? And now what suddenly
yep,
happens is that they all bring their potluck to the table. They bring what they cook at home to the table, and you create a massive feast from this diversity, right? And it's that most countries get lost in the conversation around their identity too heavily, and America has that flaws. You've sat through most of it by now if you've been there for however long you've been there, but deeply what they do right is create an economic focal point around which all
yep,
cultural assimilation can happen, and that fast tracks the way they grow as an entrepreneurial nation on a whole different level. And I know that I saw that as soon as like some of my best friends, I didn't even understand what Jewish culture meant until I was in America. Like I remember asking extremely stupid questions at a Shabbat dinner, right, to my friend and his family. And it's not just me, my family had no idea. I was extensively traveled by the time I was landing in America. My dad's always loved traveling. As soon as he had the money, he'd take us out somewhere. And so I'd seen the world by then. And even still, I had no concept. Like we'd hear of Jews as a distant artifact from the the happenstance of World War II. To us Indians, it's not very relatable, even though India was one of the first places to house a lot of immigrant Jews back in the day. We don't hear about them.
Interestingly, there are only two countries in the world which have never persecuted Jews. One is the country of Georgia, and the
Right.
other is India.
Right.
And this is historically over hundreds, if not thousands of years.
5,000
Yeah.
years. You're right. It's true. Right. And so it was quite fantastic once you understand what kind of diversity exists around the world. There's a statement I used to make the point, which is that once you see that everything can be done in the opposite way and it still works, it changes how you view the world forever. And I think that's definitely an experience American universities provide. I think they're the eighth wonder of the world, to be very honest. The American university experience is very unique. So you finished up university after a certain while. When did you come up with this idea? Tell me about the product now. We've been saving that conversation for the microphone. Tell me about the product. When did you come up with the idea? How did that happen?
Yep. And so I graduated Northeastern in December 2017, and January 2018, I joined my physics professor from Northeastern, his startup. So spinning out a startup, trying to build a new kind of radiation detector, right? And this was based on carbon nanotube technology, never been done before. Radiation detection as a field hasn't seen innovation in 100 years. And again, at this point of time, when the people around you, right, they are interviewing for positions at the big tech companies, at the big consulting companies. And for me, it was one of my other values, right, is the desire to create a change, right, the desire to create an impact in the world. And now I can quantify it better. Right? So it's lives being saved, it's increasing shareholder value, it's creating jobs. But back then it was just this desire.
Instinct,
It
right.
wasn't instinct and value, right? And I couldn't put a quantity into it. And I knew working in a corporate environment would not get me that. And also, again, it was structure, right? So, and you had these different levels and stages, and in a way, you couldn't forge your own path or destiny for that matter, right? And so startups it became, and deep interest in science, deep interest in technology, and now moving towards commercialization of science and technology. And at that startup, I was the first employee, and there was only one other full-time employee who was the CEO. The CEO was a Northeastern graduate 10 years, who had graduated from Northeastern 10 years ago, and he had worked as a management consultant. And the two professors were part-time. So me and the CEO basically built that startup, right? So throughout 2018, throughout 2019, I was there from January 2018 to December 2019, worked very closely with him. So whether it's writing grants to support our work, so we got funding from the National Science Foundation, from NASA, the US Air Force, right? And also Boeing and another organization called Cases. So that's one. Number two is doing customer discovery. So we have this very exciting new novel product, but who's going to buy it? So I figured out how to use LinkedIn effectively at that time. So just doing so many cold emails and developing relationships through social media and going from industry to industry, sector to sector. So commercial nuclear power, mass spectroscopy, the US Department of Defense, before finally finding product market fit in the vacuum gauge industry. It took us 2 years to get that. So part of this was cold emailing, cold calling, going to conferences, shaking hands, networking, and also working on developing the business model and commercialization. So all of this, so my time at that startup, it's known as Guard Ion, so Guardian. It was it was essentially again a different set of training wheels, but it taught me deep tech commercialization. So that's the term. So how do you take a novel technology from an idea into something in the marketplace? So looking from a system level, so what are the different steps involved? What are the different components involved? What's the kind of team you need? So those 2 years there really taught me that, right? And how Medsix came about, so how my current startup came about, is actually through hackathons. So the past few years, been to over 20 hackathons. And hackathons are essentially weekend events, multidisciplinary. So you have people from all over the world coming to one location, and you're creating a solution to a real world problem. And many times the solution is not even technology based. So it could be a change in a recommendation of a policy. It could be even, again, a consulting document. Hackathons range in scope, in size, in even the fields they are based on. But the hackathon that Medsix or ended up founding Medsix out of was a MIT healthcare hackathon. So it's organized by MIT Hacking Medicine. And interestingly enough, I wasn't even eligible to go to that event because they have a application you have to fill out before. And then they have, if I'm not mistaken, they have a quantitative assessment that you have to do. So you have to essentially show that you have a certain IQ or your certain level of smarts to get into that hackathon. And
How elitist,
again,
huh?
I was like, yeah, and I have no time for this. However, what I do know is many times the people who do end up sign up and getting selected, they don't show up. So let's say the hackathon is 800 people or so, you have 100 vacancies. So if you show up on the day off, they'll just let you in. And that's what I did. So I showed up the day off, they let me in, and there was a surgeon standing in the corner, right? And he looked Indian, and he is Indian, right? He's from Bombay originally, came to the US about 15 years ago to go to medical school, and ended up chatting with him. And in that hackathon, we formed a team. So found two other Fulbright scholars, business school, a HBS candidate. So we became a team of 6, and that's how the name Medsix came to be. And at the end of that event, we built a very basic prototype of a device. We ended up winning the first place. We also got a grant from MIT for further product development. And that was the real spot that set things off. However, after that hackathon, the team disappeared, right? So only me and the doctor were still in touch. But by that time, I had learned how to build teams through LinkedIn, right? Develop relationships and build teams through LinkedIn. So I leveraged those skills to create another team of 6. So find another co-founder and also initial set of consultants, right, to help us move Medsix forward. So we incorporated in March of 2019. And for most of 2019, we were bootstrapped and moonlighting. So those are startup terms. To essentially,
there's a lot of startup terms, and I kind of want to just take it in its space. One of the things you said was that you were at the hackathon when you came up with the concept for the product. You came up with the prototype for what you do now.
I didn't. The doctor did.
The doctor, like you as a team did. By you, I mean you as a team. The team as Medsix was for that hackathon. And so you, like, my conception of hackathons was that you go there to hack stuff.
What do you mean by that?
Like, I thought it's like this, because I've only seen it in like social network and stuff like that. You're sitting, there's some code, there's some firewalls, some security that you need to breach through as a game, and it's kind of like that. I thought that was what hackathon was. What is a hackathon? What does it look like? And why were you developing this? And how could you develop this product in a weekend? Like, what does that even mean?
So we did a proof of concept, right? So it wasn't even a prototype. So you put together a pitch deck with the market fundamentals. So you estimated the size of the market, and then a very rough business model, and also trying to quantify the impact you will have in the marketplace. And then my experience is developing technology, right? So developing hardware. I was able to, put together some circuits and put together a proof of concept in that weekend. So not a full product, a fully functional medical device, right? But just an initial hypothesis, right? So to test our initial hypothesis, a proof of concept. And hackathons, like I mentioned, they range in size, scope, the field they are in. And today they have come to essentially, it's a name used to broadly define events. So weekend, so Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, basically weekend events where people get together, and multidisciplinary people, right, get together to create solutions to real world problems. And those problems are set by the sponsors of the hackathon. So if Microsoft sponsors a hackathon, they'll be like, okay, we have the Microsoft band, we have the HoloLens. So guys, use this technology to do something. However, if a Sony creates a hackathon, they'll be like, we have this new API that we are releasing, right? So try using this API to create a music app or new kind of music device. Many college hackathons, so at Yale, Dartmouth, Columbia, UPenn, they don't have any topics. So you could come in there and just form a team and do anything. So in those kind of hackathons, I've created everything from a Chrome extension to an app for the Microsoft band, right? To show you like nearby museums. So
how
not much utility.
Like say you and I met in a hackathon. You're like, what's up? And I'm like, what's up? And we start talking. And we start talking like, listen, I have a great idea. Do you want to come with? And you tell me the idea. And I'm like, that sounds interesting. But we'll need 4 other people. So we go and hunt individually for those people. Like, how does the team come together in something like this? You've got 2 days to come up with everything. Do they allot you teams, or like, what is happening?
No. Very few hackathons have a mechanism for team formation. And again, this is pre-COVID. Now there are virtual hackathons where there is methodical team formation, right? But back then, most people, they came to hackathon with friends and people they know, right? But in my case, I always went solo, and I always networked my way around because I wanted each one to be unique, a new set of people, a new project, project to work on. Yeah.
Right. And so this product.
Exactly. So we get together and if either of us don't know how to code, right, you'd find a coder, hey, join us. Then if the three of us don't know what to work on, we'll find someone with a problem or an idea, right? So
Sure.
then the four of us get together. Yeah.
Sure. So you came up with this product that's some sort of a novelty in the domain that you're in. The fact that you can now reduce, you can almost reduce fertility count because of this, right? You can reduce the time before a doctor or a nurse understands when a patient is having post-operative complications, and so they could be treated faster for that. And you found a
Yes.
way to insert some kind of a reading device that reads the fluids that comes out of the post-operative wound to figure out if there is complications. Am I correct in understanding that?
So the subset of surgical procedures we are focused on are procedures where wound drains are installed, right? And a wound drain is very similar to a catheter, but it's installed after abdominal and thoracic surgeries,
Just
right?
this part,
And yeah,
right?
basically
You
thorax
can't.
abdomen.
Right. Huh. Just
So procedures after which a drain's installed are a pancreatic transplant, a liver transplant, gallbladder removal. If you have a tumor in your intestine and you're removing a part of your intestine, you install a drain. And as the name implies, and very similar to a catheter, it takes fluid from inside the body out of the body to help with the healing process. And the problem that we are solving is that the monitoring of the drain output today is entirely manual. So you have nurses, patients, doctors who pretty much eyeball the drain output. So there are inaccuracies in doing that.
there should be
And by the
massive
time,
inaccuracies,
yeah,
right? Like, because you're looking at fluid, you can't tell shit from shit. Like, you can have some estimation. I'm sure you can have like a cultivated skill of
yep,
understanding, but I I'm just so
exactly.
fascinated by the kind of accidents that can occur because of medical negligence in that case, right? Like, I'm not saying, but yeah.
So there is, as you pointed out, there's no objective measure in the space. And right now they use the color of the fluid as a proxy to detect complications. Oh, it looks turbid, might mean there's an infection. It looks bright red, it means there's excessive bleeding or new bleeding, right? It looks exceedingly greenish yellow. So it means there might be a bile leak. So again, it depends on the lighting condition, who the nurse is on rotation that day, who the resident is on rotation. So what we are doing is creating an add-on device that it's outside the patient body, it's single-use disposable, and it essentially makes this drain smart. So it has sensors that looks at biomarkers. So it looks at hemoglobin, bilirubin, and other analytes present in wound drainage. And essentially what a diagnostic test would do if let's say we took a sample of that fluid and send it to a lab for analysis, we're bringing that capability to the bedside. And we're giving all of this data to clinicians in real time so they can make better decisions. Yeah.
You mentioned how you can quantify the change that you can have, right? And I wonder, because I did not want to pick up on it then, I want to pick up on it now. What do you think? How many lives could you end up saving over a period of 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever amount of years, months? Take a time frame. I'm just trying to understand the gravity of this complication, because this feels like it's a problem that hasn't been noticed or given its due attention up until.
Yep. So the numbers we do have is for a subset of procedures, right? And these are procedures after which anastomotic leaks are very common. So there are roughly, in the US alone, over 1 million procedures annually. Again, focused on hepatobiliary pancreas, acute trauma, bariatric, colorectal procedures. 1 million procedures every year, after which anastomotic leaks occur. And the mortality rate for anastomotic leaks is 8%. Right? So you have essentially 1 in 10 patients who develop a very severe complication, and many times they don't make it. And each incidence of this leak costs the hospital $45,000. Right? So it's a huge burden. And right now, there's a delay in detecting the leak. And by the time the leak is detected, the patient has infection, fever, other complications. And just by the fact of detecting it as soon as it occurs, right? So within minutes instead of a few days later, it can save a lot of lives. We still don't know yet. We need to set up an experiment. So we have to set up a human trial, right? In order to put this device on 100, 200 patients to know how many we can save, right? But we can definitely save a lot of lives and also a lot of cost for the hospitals. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Where are you in the process? When do you expect this to be available? Like, I mean, this is not going to be something that directly affects me, you know. This is one of the, I'd say, less glorious startups in that sense. This is not Facebook. This is not something that will just directly impact everybody and their homes. This is specific. This solves for a very specific problem. And it sounds like it does that extremely efficiently. But when do you expect your results to have fruition? When do you expect this to be in the markets? When do you expect this? Because I understand that you're still in the process of creating the final stage for yourself, right?
Yep. I would say again, COVID has its own, it affects different businesses differently, and especially medical devices, right? When you're reliant on surgical volume in order to get data. And I would say a year or two away from real world applications. So actually having FDA clearance and getting data from uh, in a life setting, so from humans in a hospital. And this, and so far we have been making rapid progress, right? So to quickly talk about that. So in December of 2019, so we incorporated in March of 2019, pretty much spent March to December, weekday evenings, weekends, working on Medsix. And we did a lot of market research. So we spoke to dozens of surgeons, nurses, hospital administrators, insurers, put together a business plan, put together a pitch deck, right? And essentially the different components it takes to build or to create a startup. And then in December of 2019, we got our first investor. So it's a firm in Boston known as Pillar VC. So it's a venture capital firm. And they invested $250,000 in us. And we got accepted to their accelerator program known as Petri, as in a Petri dish as well. And later in early 2020, including Pillar VC's 250, we raised another $250,000 from angel investors. And so we have totally raised well over $500,000 and to date. And those angel investors, we were very fortunate, right? So they include an executive director at Morgan Stanley, a member of the Disney family, right? And also the former CFO of GE. So who all of them personally wrote checks, right? Because they believed in me and in Medsix and our mission as well. And with that funding, we hired 3 full-time employees. We've filed a patent which got published. We did a submission to the FDA. We've done animal trials, lots of lab testing, and we are currently beginning to do a human trial as well, and also raise an additional round of financing to help us accomplish our next set of milestones. But since January 1st, 2020, so since New Year's Day 2020, I've been full-time in Medsix, right? And that's an incredible experience. And everyone on our team, all of our investors, all of our team members, and also all of our investors, everyone's older than me. So again, it's a lot of responsibility, but also an incredible learning opportunity. And again, gratitude to all of the people who believed in me and also believe in us now as a team. Yeah.
Right, dude. It's unique. It's so interesting, so fascinating. Because I just heard the story of you from when you were 7 up until you were 23 from somebody who was just playing around in a lab, who was just bored of school, to then finally, creating your mark in this rather personalized, unique way as you are right now. It's quite a story. I have just one last question, and this is for my own personal curiosity. I'm just wondering, where does Nikin go from here? Like I understand we don't know what the future is going to do to us, etc., etc. Like, that's all cool, that's all cliche. But like, when Nikin stares into the future, what are even the vaguest ideas he has about where life is going?
That's a great question, and I'll answer this coming back to something we are talking about at the beginning of our conversation is uh, this is what I advise anyone is to do work which is aligned with their values, right? And the values that we spoke about was, control, autonomy, right? And desire for ownership, control, autonomy. So that's one set of values, which, and again, these are my values. That's one set of values. The other is the desire to create a change, a deep desire to create a change and an impact in the world. And we broke that down into a few things, which is increasing shareholder value, creating jobs, and also saving lives or even improving patients' lives, right? Patients, people's, consumers' um, lives. So desire to create a change and impact. And the third, I would say, is it's the desire to, you could say, constantly learn or be on the cutting edge, right? Is to work on something novel, new, exciting. So always, so again, Paul Graham from Y Combinator, he says that technology today is it's an ever expanding fractal plane. So as long as you're on the edges of the fractal, you're it's always new and exciting and novel. So these these broad sets of values, right, are what I believe in and what drive me, right? And I want to be doing work which are reflective of these values. And I have happened to found a vehicle that is reflective of these values, which is entrepreneurship. So, and also down the road, that would be one part of entrepreneurship is company creation, company formation, and scaling it and exiting it. And the other part is also investing, right? So down the road, it would essentially be creating or going on to create companies in this industry, in multiple different industries, and also eventually becoming an investor so I can give back to the community at large, right? And help other ambitious founders create a change and an impact in the world. So
Respect for that, dude.
I still don't know exactly what industries or what any of those future companies or future investments would hold, but that would be
The
my
vaguest
bet. Yeah.
idea that you have right now. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Very cool. That's great, man. I had a lovely time talking to you. I was wondering before we began the conversation, what does it look like, this life of an anomaly? It might not be, say, the most relatable life that somebody could have, but it's such an interesting lesson. If I were to be reading a book, this would be this is something I'd like to know. What happens when you immerse a kid into an alternate reality altogether? What does that make out of him? And Nikin's that story living itself out in real life, and it's insane. It's interesting what you've made for yourself, what how your life's turned out, and the fact that you have all this gratitude and this desire to pay back, and then all this honesty to talk about it without, because I put you through some ever so slightly, I put you through some very interesting questions, I hope. And the fact that you were able to handle them deftly tells me how secure and comfortable you are with the way your life spanned out and the way you want to take it forward. I'm glad to have made contact with you, my friend. This was an interesting story, without a doubt.
Likewise. Yeah. Honored at this opportunity that you chose to have me on this podcast. I hope this inspires, right, many of your listeners, young and old. And if anybody would like to reach out to me, I'm very accessible and approachable on LinkedIn. So feel free to drop me a message.
Flood his DMs.
And yeah, see where it takes from there. Yep.
Right, Nikin. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much.